Hey everybody, welcome to Sketchy Go Ichie. I'm your host, Roger Andrews. Hey, would you like to know how to draw Harley Quinn? Or at least draw Harley Quinn in my funky little squatted, chunky way? If you do, stay tuned and enjoy.
Sketchy Go Ichie.
Alright guys, how to draw Harley Quinn. We are back at it, doing comic book flavored characters. This is part 1 of 2 in my How to Draw Like a Pro series, and this is how we do it. So as you can see here, I'm going to display for you kind of the finished product. This is what I did. Ultimately, this is the target we're shooting for. We're going to get to the end result. You can see I can try to do a little clever treatment of the Joker there in the shadow. Really what it's all about is the layering in the end. We're going to get into this more in part 2, but for now I really want to kind of dive into the most important aspects of this, and in order to do so, I'm going to copy the canvas here. What I'd like to do is essentially give you all a sense of like how we kind of start this thing, sort of the construction stage or the foundational stage of this. So I'm just going to layer this like sort of duplicated layer as art layer, and I'm going to take all these other layers, all the other layers used to create the color piece, and put them into one group. Of course I have to rename it, maybe a little anal retentive I guess, but I'll just, for organizational sake, I'll just kind of rename it and sort of take away the vision of it, or should I say the ability to see that group. And as you can see, I just kind of reduced our girl Harley Quinn down in size, just so I have kind of visual reference. And I like to select a rougher brush. I use the ink bleed brush. It's kind of one of the stock brushes that come with Procreate, and I use that for my kind of rough stages. So we're doing form, structure, anatomy, just to kind of get a sense of the character. So of course, if you notice, I give 2 little ticks, 2 little lines, one at the top, one at the bottom. They kind of represent the height and the lowest portion of the character. And as you can see here, I almost always start with the head. I know a lot of other artists tell you not to do that, but I like to just kind of get a sense about how big the head is before I kind of decide how big the body's going to be. It may be a little counterintuitive, but it kind of works for me, and I think it could work for you if you're disciplined with it. And of course, there's that little sort of like, bow tie shape in the middle. On my female characters, they tend to have this kind of either slightly or more exaggerated hourglass figure to kind of represent femininity. And it's kind of a design language thing that you should really kind of study and work with. And of course, I quickly start to add in the appendages, the arms and the legs. But for me, again, I start with the head. I get the little bow tie, sort of kind of torso section figured out, and then I usually do the legs and then the arms. And if you notice here, I've kind of drawn these elongated arms. It's just a style choice. It's just, if you see up in the upper left hand corner, the sort of the reference of the final image, you notice that she's got really long arms, and I had to represent that here in this sort of form sketch, this sort of character proportion sketch. And I really wanted to give you guys a sense of like how you probably should start if you're a character designer, or you fashion yourself to be one, either now or down the road in your profession. You really have to have a grasp of proportion, and even though this is exaggerated and this is sort of cartoony proportions, you do have to have a sense of like how to make anatomy within that proportion, within that structure that you crafted for yourself here. And even here in rendering the, some kind of doing the details of the face here, or should I say the rough structure of the face here, I'm keeping it very, very, very loose. And the reason for that is like, there's no reason at this stage to go overly heavily detailed. So of course, right here, me again, I had to label that body. Body 1 basically is what that is. So it's just a basic front view. But I wanted to capture the proportions of the character. Once you have, the reason behind this, by the way, is once you have these character proportions dialed in, you're able to alter them. You're able to basically take this sort of, wireframe of a character and kind of extrapolate what this character could look like in motion. And you cannot do that until you have a sense of the proportions and the anatomy of the character. It's hard to distort, manipulate, animate a character if you don't at least have this stage kind of dialed in, this sort of, what are the proportions of my character? And right here, I'm just trying to figure out, all right, she's got these little sort of swoops of hair that kind of cut across the sides, both sides of her face. And, you can kind of see like the area where her ponytails flare off on the side of her head, on both sides of her head. So I'm trying to indicate the, the kind of the flow of those, ponytails, those long ponytails with the color sort of, airbrushed in from the bottom. But I have to kind of basically figure out, well, if I were to see this character from the front view, which I'm rendering here, how far down the body, as you can see right around where her forearm meets her elbow, how far down do these the ends of these ponytails go? And because she's a character who is really identified by her costume or lack of a costume in this kind of newer version. By the way, this is not the original Paul Dini and Bruce Timm Batman the Animated Series version from the 90s. This is a version from the more recent animated series of Harley Quinn. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's the really aggressive Harley Quinn one, the sort of not necessarily for kids version, the one that's streaming, I think, on HBO Max. This is probably also on HBO Max, excuse me. But it's the cartoon version with, I think it's her and a bunch of other female characters. My little daughter, my little 6-year-old, watches it. So that's how you know it's the for kids version, because I allow my daughter to watch it. But anyways, yeah. So I just wanted to indicate some of her costuming, But for me, it's really just about the form and the proportions of all the parts. So you can see here, I'm just sort of merging those two layers together. What I did is I created a separate layer to kind of add some extra elements to this front view form, and I'm sort of erasing out and sort of adding in little bits of hair to just kind of represent what my mind's eye tells me this character would look like from the front view, with that little reference image from the final piece. And right now, I'm making a decision. Well, if I'm going to draw her from the front view, I want to have a sense of what the character would look like from the side view as well. This technique of sort of creating turnarounds for characters or character sheets, or there's probably several different things you can call definitions for what this is, these sort of control art. It's essential to character design, particularly in animation. I don't have an animation background. I've got more of a sort of a product design, toy industry sort of character design background. A lot of what I do is for toy companies, particularly Hasbro, and I've done some stuff for Disney and some other companies. And the reality is, like, you need to have this sort of control art when rendering the character for wherever it's going to wind up, whether it be on screen or as a actual physical toy. And so as you can see here, I just rendered these lines across the top of her head, through the middle of her body, and down to her feet, so that I can have a rough sort of guide onto where the parts would land in the side view, so that they match up to where they would be in the front view. And it's going to take a bit of adjustment. And yes, guys, this is part of. I look at this stage of art as almost like, if you're trying to be fit, if you're trying to be someone who is physically fit, you have to kind of start off foundationally. You have to start off maybe just kind of getting your endurance up and stretching and making sure that you don't injure yourself. And I don't want to have an art injury here, so I highly recommend you guys kind of, all of you, or all of us, kind of do these little control art things, these sort of like character studies, kind of figure out, all right, where do the calves lie in this case here, or where's her center of gravity? Like right now, she's sort of leaning forward. I'll adjust that in a few, you're gonna see. But I just got to figure, all right, well, her boots are going to sit here, her legs are going to be here, her center of gravity will be sort of offset by like her arm placement. If you notice, I've like tucked her arm back and then back again towards her the side of her thigh, and it's just sort of, I imagine like she arch her shoulders back because she's a pretty confident character, especially when she's not around the Joker, and so yeah, there's a lot of sort of character play that happens, or sort of some personality that you can infuse even in a standing pose of a character. And you can't get there until you at least have a sense of the form of the character, and then you can allow the visual language to tell a story about what the character's personality is. But I definitely suggest you start here. And this is where so this is the point where I'm going to start making some adjustments to it. I'm kind of putting some little rough details in to Harley Quinn as as how it would relate to the world visually from the side. So I'm sort of kind of seeing, all right, well, these little tufts of hair that are coming out of the center of her head and down along the side of her face, they'd probably end about, where they are there in her back of her head. And, all right, where's the ponytail gonna land? And how would it look, and what would it obscure along the front side of, or should I say the side of her body? And those little swift swatches of hair, and how they would sort of one bow outward, one bow inward. And this is where I realize, I look at her head and I'm like, all right, her head is way too big for one, and way too far forward. It's what's making her center of gravity feel like she's leaning too far forward. And so this is the beauty of working in digitally. If this was in, like how I used to pretty much draw my whole life on paper, I would just grab another sheet of, tracing paper, go right on top and just re-render the character. But because I'm working in digitally and working in Procreate, it's very easy for me to just like select that section, reduce it in size, distort it to make it sort of work properly with this side view. And as you can see, like, hopefully you can see, like it now, her head is now at least a little more proportional to that front view. It feels a little more in line, a little more natural to about the size of her from the front. But anyway, so that's the character design front and side. So the reason I bring that up, why do I even not waste that time, but why spend that time showing you guys that, is to be able to do something like this. Is to now I know roughly her proportions, so I can start loosely sort of figuring out, what do I want to do? How do I pose it now? Now that I have, it's almost like I created a mental posable doll. And now that I have it, I can sort of draw, I can pose this character in my mind based off of that sketch. In the reality, this happened before that loose sketch, this sort of like little pose, this sort of her swinging that enormous, Harley Quinn hammer. So I just wanted to go back and show you the sketches that I used to kind of create that pose and to create those control art. And this is the one right here. This one here on the right that I'm sketching right now. These are the proportions, and as you can see, again, this is just a very loose sketch, but what it has is the sort of the anatomy, the proportionality, the structure. Even in these little, it's probably no more than 30 sketch lines to create it, but I have a relative sense of it because A, I've done it a bunch of times, so I've practiced, but B, I have a feel for about how long her arms are, about how far to extend them, how long her legs are, how big her head is. Obviously, she's a cartoon character, so her head is much larger than it should be. But anyways, that is how you do it. So start with your structure, your foundational stuff, then you'll have it so when you want to get creative. And then I'm going to get into the inking, and of course, we're going to get into the coloring in the next stage. So stay tuned for part 2. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do, definitely leave me a comment. But for now, sketchy go ichie, live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell icon. See ya. Peace.